Good evening and welcome. Tonight I invite you to slow down, settle into a comfortable place, and join me on a quiet journey through one of the most extraordinary waterways in human history, a narrow strip of sea less than 50 kilometers wide. And yet, nearly 1/4 of all the oil transported by sea around the world passes through this single passage. For more than 2,000 years, kings, merchants, explorers, and empires have all understood the same remarkable truth. Whoever could influence the Strait of Hormuz held the key to one of the world's greatest crossroads of trade. But how did such a small stretch of water become so important? Why have ancient kingdoms, European empires, global superpowers, and modern nations all turned their attention to the very same place? And why does a quiet waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman still have the power to influence fuel prices, global trade, and the daily lives of billions of people across the world? Tonight, we will travel gently through thousands of years of history, from the earliest civilizations that sailed these waters, to the rise of the Kingdom of Hormuz, the arrival of European empires, the discovery of oil, the Cold War, and the geopolitical challenges that continue to shape this remarkable passage today. Before we begin, I'd love to know a little about you. Where in the world are you watching this video from? And what time is it where you are right now? Leave a comment below. I always enjoy seeing how many different countries and time zones come together for these quiet journeys through history. Now, dim the lights if you can, get comfortable and allow the noise of the day to slowly fade away. Tonight, there is nowhere to rush, nowhere to be. Only the gentle sound of the sea and the timeless story of the Strait of Hormuz. To understand why the Strait of Hormuz became one of the most important waterways in the world, we must first travel far beyond the rise of kingdoms, long before merchants sailed these waters, and even before humans walked the earth. Our journey begins millions of years ago. At that time, the landscape of the Middle East looked nothing like it does today. The continents themselves were still moving, drifting ever so slowly across the surface of the planet, although the motion was almost impossible to notice within a human lifetime. Over millions of years it reshaped oceans, lifted mountain ranges, and carved new coastlines. One of the greatest geological events occurred when the Arabian Plate gradually pushed northward against the vast Eurasian Plate. The collision was incredibly slow, measured in only a few centimeters each year. Yet over countless ages, that gentle pressure folded layers of ancient seeped upward, creating the rugged Zagros Mountains that now stretch across modern-day Iran. As those mountains slowly rose, the surrounding land changed with them. To the west lay a broad basin that would eventually become the Persian Gulf. To the east stretched the deeper waters of what we now know as the Gulf of Oman, opening into the Arabian Sea, and beyond that, the Indian Ocean. Between these two bodies of water remained only a narrow natural passage. This passage would become the Strait of Hormuz. Unlike rivers carved by rushing water or canals built by human hands, the Strait of Hormuz was shaped patiently by the earth itself. Tectonic movements, changing sea levels, erosion, and countless cycles of climate all worked together over millions of years to create this remarkable gateway between two seas. At its narrowest point, the strait measures less than 50 kilometers across. It is surprisingly small. Standing on one shoreline, the opposite coast almost feels within reach. Yet this modest distance would eventually determine the movement of civilizations, economies, and empires. Geography often rewards places where travelers have no easy alternative. The Strait of Hormuz is a perfect example. The Persian Gulf contains some of the richest energy reserves ever discovered, But there is only one natural route connecting these sheltered waters to the open ocean. Every ship leaving the Gulf must pass through this narrow corridor before continuing toward Asia, Africa, or Europe. In many ways, the strait functions like the neck of an hourglass. No matter how vast the upper chamber may be, everything must eventually pass through its narrow center. This simple geographical reality transformed an ordinary stretch of water into one of the world's greatest maritime chokepoints. Long before oil made the region famous, ancient sailors already understood its importance. Merchant vessels carrying pearls, dates, spices, incense, and precious fabrics all followed these waters because there were few practical alternatives. Whoever watched over the strait could observe nearly every ship entering or leaving the Persian Gulf. Adding even greater significance were the islands scattered throughout the surrounding waters. Some are little more than rocky outcrops rising from the sea. Others provide natural harbors, freshwater sources, or elevated ground from which distant ships can be seen approaching long before they reach the coast. Among the most strategically important are Hormuz Island, Qashm Island, and Larak Island. Together, they overlook key shipping lanes and have served, at different times, as trading centers, military outposts, and defensive strongholds. From these islands, rulers could monitor maritime traffic, collect taxes from passing merchants, or defend the entrance to the Gulf. Even today, these islands remain deeply significant, reminding us that geography rarely loses its influence. As the sun rises over the calm waters each morning, the Strait of Hormuz appears peaceful, almost timeless. Gentle waves roll between rocky coastlines that have stood for millions of years, while ships quietly continue their journeys toward distant horizons. Yet beneath that peaceful surface lies a story written by the slow movement of continents, shaped by ancient oceans, and destined to influence the course of human history. Sometimes the smallest places on the map hold the greatest power. And in the chapters ahead, we will discover how this quiet geological wonder became one of the most sought-after gateways the world has ever known. Now that we understand how the Strait of Hormuz came into existence, let us move forward through time, into an age long before oil tankers, steel warships, or modern ports. Imagine these waters almost 5,000 years ago. There were no engines humming across the sea. No satellites watching from above. Only the steady rhythm of wooden ships carried by the wind, their sails billowing gently beneath the warm Middle Eastern sun. Even in those distant centuries, the Strait of Hormuz was already alive with movement. For ancient civilizations, this narrow passage was not merely a body of water. It was a bridge between worlds. Among the earliest peoples to benefit from these maritime routes were the Sumerians, who flourished in the fertile lands of southern Mesopotamia. Their cities were rich in culture and innovation, yet poor in many natural resources. They needed timber, stone metals, and luxury goods that could not easily be found along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Ships sailing through the Persian Gulf became their connection to distant lands. As trade expanded, new kingdoms inherited these valuable routes. The Babylonians continued to strengthen commercial networks, sending merchants farther across the Gulf, while welcoming foreign traders into their growing cities. Markets became gathering places where languages mixed, ideas spread, and cultures quietly influenced one another. Long before written history recorded great battles, commerce was already weaving civilizations together. Farther east, merchants from the Indian subcontinent crossed the Arabian Sea with remarkable skill. Guided by seasonal monsoon winds, they sailed toward the entrance of the Persian Gulf, where the Strait of Hormuz served as the natural gateway to Mesopotamia and beyond. Their voyages were neither easy nor predictable. Weeks at sea demanded patience, experience, and trust in the changing winds. Yet the rewards made every journey worthwhile. Their ships carried fragrant spices that transformed ordinary meals into treasured feasts. Fine cotton textiles, carefully woven by skilled artisans, traveled alongside carved ivory, precious gemstones, and beautifully crafted pottery. Meanwhile, caravans arriving from Persia brought goods of their own. The Persian Empire, stretching across vast territories, understood the immense value of connecting land and sea. Roads carried merchandise toward coastal ports, where cargo was carefully transferred onto waiting ships bound for distant destinations. Among the most prized treasures passing through Hormuz was silk. Produced primarily in China and carried westward through countless hands, silk represented far more than clothing. It symbolized wealth, refinement, and international prestige. A single bolt of fine silk might travel thousands of kilometers before finally reaching a royal court in the Middle East or the Mediterranean. Another prized commodity came directly from the warm waters of the Persian Gulf itself: pearls. Long before cultured pearls existed, divers descended into the sea with little more than courage and remarkable breath-holding ability. They searched the sea for oysters, hoping to discover the rare natural pearls hidden within. It was dangerous work. Each dive carried risks, yet the shimmering pearls they recovered became some of the most valuable gems in the ancient world. Rulers, nobles, and wealthy merchants all desired these natural treasures, and many found their way through the markets surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. The region also became famous for another remarkable export: Arabian horses. Bred across the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, these elegant animals were admired for their endurance, intelligence, and extraordinary speed. Kings sought them for their cavalry, while wealthy families prized them as symbols of prestige. Transporting horses by sea required exceptional care, but merchants willingly accepted the challenge because demand remained high across neighboring civilizations. What makes all of this especially remarkable is that none of these goods had anything to do with oil. Thousands of years before petroleum transformed the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz had already become one of the world's busiest commercial crossroads. Its importance came not from what lay beneath the ground, but from where it stood upon the map. It connected east with west, deserts with oceans, ancient kingdoms with distant civilizations that might never meet face to face, except through the quiet exchange of goods carried aboard wooden ships. Every vessel entering the Persian Gulf carried not only cargo, but also stories, beliefs, technologies, languages, and traditions. A merchant arriving with spices might leave with pearls. A sailor bringing silk could return home with Persian silver or Arabian horses. In this way, trade accomplished something armies often could not. It connected people peacefully across immense distances. As evening settled over these ancient waters, countless ships anchored beneath starlit skies, waiting for favorable winds to continue their journeys. Few of those sailors could have imagined that they were navigating one of history's most enduring crossroads. For thousands of years, the Strait of Hormuz quietly linked civilizations together, proving that even the narrowest passage can become the meeting place of the world. And this was only the beginning of its extraordinary story. As the centuries quietly passed, the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz continued to welcome merchants from every direction. Kingdoms rose and fell across the Middle East, but trade never truly stopped. Each generation inherited the same timeless understanding: whoever could provide safety, stability, and access to these waters would attract merchants from across the known world. And eventually, one kingdom did exactly that. It became known simply as the Kingdom of Hormuz. Its story began along the southern coast of Persia, where an early settlement prospered through commerce. Positioned near the entrance to the Persian Gulf, it was perfectly placed to receive goods arriving from India, Arabia, East Africa, and beyond. For generations exchanged spices, textiles, metals, pearls, and precious stones in its busy markets. Yet prosperity often attracts danger. During the 13th century, waves of conflict swept through the region. Raids and invasions threatened the flourishing port, making trade increasingly uncertain. Rather than allowing their kingdom to disappear, the rulers of Hormuz made an extraordinary decision. They moved the capital. Instead of remaining on the mainland, they relocated the kingdom to a nearby island, today known as Hormuz Island. It was a bold choice. Although the island offered little fresh water and few natural resources, it possessed something far more valuable: security. Surrounded by the sea, the island was easier to defend against invading armies. More importantly, it sat directly beside one of the world's greatest maritime crossroads. The sea became its protective wall. From this new island capital, the Kingdom of Hormuz entered its golden age. Visitors arriving by ship were often amazed by what they discovered. Instead of a lonely fortress standing in the middle of the sea, they found a thriving port city filled with activity from sunrise until long after sunset. Wooden docks stretched into the harbor, where vessels of every shape and size waited patiently to unload their cargo. Sailors shouted in dozens of different languages, while merchants carefully negotiated prices beneath colorful market awnings. The air itself reflected the diversity of the world. The scent of Indian spices drifted through narrow streets. Bundles of fine silk arrived from distant Asia. Incense from southern Arabia filled the marketplaces with its sweet fragrance. Pearls harvested from the Persian Gulf sparkled beside precious gemstones from India and East Africa. Every arriving ship seemed to bring another piece of the world with it. The rulers of Hormuz understood that wealth did not come from conquest alone. It came from welcoming trade. Rather than discouraging foreign merchants, they encouraged them to visit. Taxes remained reasonable, ports were kept secure, and commercial agreements helped create an atmosphere of stability. In an era when piracy and warfare threatened many sea routes, Hormuz earned a reputation as a reliable place to conduct business. That reputation became one of its greatest treasures. Soon, merchants planned their voyages specifically to include Hormuz as a major stop. Ships sailing from India toward Mesopotamia paused here to exchange cargo. Traders from Persia met Arab merchants on the docks. Goods from East Africa changed hands before continuing toward Central Asia or the Mediterranean. The island became far more than a port. It became a meeting place of civilizations. Walking through its streets would have been like taking a journey across continents, without ever leaving the island. One might hear Persian spoken in one marketplace, Arabic in another, while Indian traders discussed prices nearby. Travelers carried not only merchandise but also stories, scientific knowledge, artistic traditions, and religious ideas. Commerce quietly connected cultures long before diplomacy ever could. Some medieval travelers even described Hormuz as one of the richest trading cities in the Middle East. Its rulers accumulated remarkable wealth, not because they controlled vast farmland or rich mines, because they occupied one of the most valuable locations on Earth. Every ship that entered the Persian Gulf understood the importance of this island, and countless ships did exactly that. Throughout the year, long merchant convoys crossed the Arabian Sea, timing their departures with the seasonal monsoon winds. Their wooden vessels carried cotton, silk, spices, ivory, porcelain, precious metals, pearls, horses, and countless other valuable goods. Upon reaching Hormuz, the harbor filled with towering masts, fluttering sails, and crews from distant lands. The waterfront rarely fell silent. Day after day, cargo was unloaded, inspected, traded, and loaded once again for the next stage of its journey. Some ships continued north toward the great cities of Mesopotamia. Others sailed west toward Arabia and the Red Sea. Still others returned east across the Indian Ocean, carrying new cargo and fresh fortunes. Every successful voyage reinforced Hormuz's position as one of the world's greatest commercial hubs. Its wealth did not depend upon manufacturing or agriculture. It depended upon movement, upon the endless rhythm of ships arriving and departing, upon the trust of merchants who believed their goods would be safe, upon a narrow passage of water that had quietly become the heartbeat of international commerce. As evening settled over the island, hundreds of lanterns reflected across the calm harbor. Ships rested peacefully at anchor, their cargo secured for another day. Conversations softened as merchants prepared for tomorrow's exchanges, while gentle waves lapped against the wooden docks that had welcomed travelers from across the known world. Few places in medieval history demonstrated the power of geography more clearly than the Kingdom of Hormuz. It was not the largest kingdom, nor the most powerful in military strength. Yet through wisdom, stability, and an extraordinary location, it transformed a small island into one of the richest ports on earth, proving that sometimes the greatest fortunes are built not by conquering the world, but by connecting it. For centuries, the Kingdom of Hormuz had prospered by welcoming merchants from every corner of the known world. Its rulers understood that wealth flowed with trade, and the harbor remained filled with ships carrying silk, spices, pearls, horses, and precious metals. But as the 15th century drew to a close, a new power was rising far beyond the horizon. It came from the western edge of Europe, Portugal. At the time, European kingdoms were searching for a direct sea route to Asia. For generations, valuable goods from India and the Far East had reached Europe through long networks of merchants crossing the Middle East. Every exchange added another cost, making spices, silk and other luxuries incredibly expensive by the time they reached European markets. The Portuguese dreamed of changing that. Instead of relying on ancient overland trade routes, they wanted to sail directly to Asia. That dream became reality when the explorer Vasco da Gama successfully rounded the southern tip of Africa and reached India by sea. His voyage changed history. For the first time, European ships could sail directly into the Indian Ocean without crossing the lands controlled by powerful Middle Eastern empires. Portugal suddenly saw something few others had fully understood. Controlling the sea could be just as powerful as controlling the land. And to dominate the sea, they would need to control its gateways. One of the greatest gateways of them all was the Strait of Hormuz. A few years later, another remarkable figure entered the story. His name was Afonso de Albuquerque. Unlike many explorers, Albuquerque was not simply searching for new lands. He was building an empire connected not by roads or vast territories, but by the sea. His strategy was surprisingly simple. Instead of conquering entire continents, Portugal would capture the world's most important ports and narrow waterways. Whoever controlled these maritime crossroads could influence trade across thousands of kilometers. Hormuz quickly became one of his highest priorities. In the year 1507, Albuquerque sailed toward the island with a powerful fleet. The Kingdom of Hormuz was wealthy, but it was not prepared to face Portugal's heavily armed naval force. European ships carried powerful bronze cannons capable of striking targets from great distances, giving them a decisive advantage over many regional fleets. After a brief campaign, the Portuguese established their authority over Hormuz. The island remained an important trading center, but now its prosperity served a new master. Almost immediately, construction began on a great fortress overlooking the harbor. Built from thick stone walls and positioned to command the surrounding waters, the fortress stood as both a military base and a powerful symbol of Portuguese authority. From its towers, soldiers could watch merchant ships approaching long before they entered the harbor. Even today, the ruins of that fortress still stand, quietly overlooking the sea as they have for more than 5 centuries. The Portuguese understood that controlling Hormuz was about much more than defending an island. It was about controlling movement. Every merchant vessel entering or leaving the Persian Gulf passed beneath their watchful eyes. With that control came another source of immense wealth: taxes. Ships arriving from India, Persia, Arabia, and East Africa often paid duties before continuing their journeys. These fees generated enormous income for the Portuguese crown while reinforcing its authority throughout the region. For many merchants, paying the tax was simply part of doing business. The alternative was often too dangerous. Portuguese warships patrolled nearby waters, protecting friendly merchants while discouraging rivals. Their naval power made piracy more difficult in some areas, but it also ensured that Portugal remained the dominant maritime force throughout much of the Indian Ocean. It was a new kind of empire. Unlike the great land empires of Persia or the Ottoman world, Portugal did not need to occupy vast territories filled with millions of people. Instead, it connected a chain of strategic ports stretching from Europe to Africa, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Each port acted like a link in an enormous maritime network. Hormuz became one of its strongest links. From this small island, Portugal could monitor trade entering the Persian Gulf, influence commerce across the Middle East, and strengthen its growing presence throughout the Indian Ocean. In many ways, this marked the beginning of the world's first truly global maritime empire. Its strength depended not on the size of its population, but on its ships, its cannons, and its ability to control the narrow passages through which global commerce flowed. As evening settled over Hormuz, merchant vessels still filled the harbor, just as they had for centuries. The markets remained busy. The spices still filled the air with their familiar fragrance. Silk continued to arrive from distant lands. Pearls still glittered beneath the warm sunlight. To an ordinary traveler, little may have seemed different. Yet beneath the peaceful rhythm of daily life, everything had changed. For the first time in history, a European naval empire controlled the entrance to the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer merely a meeting place of civilizations. It had become a prize in a new age of global competition, an age in which powerful kingdoms would cross entire oceans to command a single, narrow passage of water. And Portugal would soon discover that holding Hormuz was far more difficult than conquering it. For more than a century, the Portuguese fortress stood watch over the Strait of Hormuz. Merchant ships still arrived from India, Arabia, Persia, and East Africa. The markets remained busy, and the harbor continued to thrive. But beneath the familiar rhythm of commerce, resentment had quietly grown. The Kingdom of Hormuz no longer ruled itself. The taxes collected from passing ships enriched a distant European empire, while Portugal's cannons reminded every visitor who now controlled the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Yet history rarely remains still. To the north, a new Persian ruler was transforming his empire into one of the greatest powers of the early modern world. His name was Shah Abbas I. Ascending to the throne during the late 16th century, Shah Abbas inherited a kingdom surrounded by powerful rivals. The Ottoman Empire pressed from the west, the Uzbeks threatened from the east, and Portuguese warships controlled one of Persia's most valuable maritime gateways. He understood that if Persia wished to become truly powerful again, it could not allow a foreign navy to dominate its coastline. But Shah Abbas was more than a warrior. He was a patient strategist. Rather than rushing into battle, he spent years strengthening his empire from within. He reorganized the army, modernized its weapons, improved the economy, and encouraged trade throughout Persia. Roads were repaired, new cities flourished, and merchants once again found security within Persian territory. As his kingdom grew stronger, so did his ambition. Eventually, his attention turned toward Hormuz. Removing the Portuguese, however, would not be easy. Their fortress was heavily defended, and their fleet remained one of the strongest naval forces in the Indian Ocean. Persia possessed a capable army, but it lacked the powerful navy needed to challenge Portugal at sea. Shah Abbas recognized this weakness. Instead of fighting alone, he searched for an ally. At exactly the same time, another rising power had begun expanding its influence across Asia. England. More specifically, the English East India Company. Originally established to conduct trade with Asia, the company had gradually developed its own ships, soldiers, and political ambitions. Portuguese dominance often restricted English commercial opportunities, making Hormuz an obstacle as much as an opportunity. For both Persia and England, Portugal had become a common rival. An unlikely alliance began to take shape. Persian soldiers would fight on land. English ships would provide the naval strength needed to challenge the Portuguese fortress. It was a partnership built not upon friendship, but upon shared interests. In the year 1622, the combined operation began. English warships entered the waters surrounding Hormuz, while Persian forces prepared to strike from the mainland. Together, they placed the island under intense pressure. The Portuguese fortress, once considered nearly invincible, suddenly faced attacks from both land and sea. For weeks, fierce fighting continued. Cannons echoed across the harbor. Smoke drifted above the stone walls. The same fortress that had symbolized Portuguese dominance for more than 100 years now struggled to withstand a determined coalition. Gradually, supplies inside the fortress began to run low. Resistance weakened. Finally, the Portuguese surrendered. Their long control over Hormuz had come to an end. For the first time in more than a century, the island returned to Persian authority. It was a turning point not only for Persia, but for the balance of power across the Indian Ocean. The victory demonstrated that even Europe's greatest maritime empire could be defeated when regional powers combined their strength with carefully chosen allies. Yet Shah Abbas had no intention of simply restoring the old order. Rather than rebuilding Hormuz as his primary commercial center, he shifted much of Persia's maritime trade to a nearby mainland port. That city would eventually become known as Bandar Abbas. Named in honor of the Shah himself, the port gradually replaced Hormuz as Persia's principal gateway to international commerce. Meanwhile, the once busy island slowly lost much of the importance it enjoyed during its golden age. Its famous markets became quieter. Fewer merchant ships anchored in its harbor. The center of regional trade had moved elsewhere, yet the strait itself remained as vital as ever. Geography had not changed. Every vessel entering or leaving the Persian Gulf still had to pass through the same narrow waters. Control of the island had shifted. The strategic importance of the passage had not. As evening settled over the Gulf once again, The familiar procession of merchant ships continued across the calm sea. Their sails caught the gentle wind just as they had for thousands of years. Empires came and went. Flags rose above fortresses only to be lowered by the next generation. But the Strait of Hormuz endured. Its significance never depended upon a single kingdom or a single empire. Instead, it was shaped by geography itself, a narrow corridor connecting continents, cultures and economies. Shah Abbas had reclaimed one of Persia's greatest maritime gateways, restoring control over a region that foreign powers had dominated for generations. His victory marked the return of Persian influence to the entrance of the Gulf, and demonstrated that the balance of power in the Middle East was beginning to change once again. But the struggle for Hormuz was far from over. In the centuries ahead, new empires would sail into these waters. The age of Portuguese dominance had ended. Soon, another global power would emerge, carrying a different flag, a larger navy and ambitions that reached even farther across the world. With the Portuguese driven from Hormuz in the early 17th century, a new chapter quietly unfolded across the waters of the Persian Gulf. The fall of one empire did not bring an end to foreign interest in the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, it invited new competitors. As Europe's great maritime powers expanded across the oceans, they all came to recognize the same simple truth that ancient merchants had understood for thousands of years. The Strait of Hormuz was far more than a narrow channel of water. It was a gateway. Whoever could influence this gateway would gain access to one of the world's richest trading regions and strengthen their position across the Indian Ocean. Among the first to seize new opportunities were the Dutch. During the 17th century, the Dutch Republic had become one of the greatest commercial powers on earth. Its merchants sailed farther than almost anyone before them, while the Dutch East India Company built an extraordinary network of ports stretching from southern Africa to Southeast Asia. Unlike the Portuguese, whose empire relied heavily on military conquest, the Dutch often focused on commerce. Their ships arrived carrying silver, textiles, manufactured goods, and valuable cargo from Europe. In return, they sought spices, silk, pearls, dates, horses, and countless other products moving through the Persian Gulf. Dutch merchants established trading relationships throughout the region, competing vigorously with every rival they encountered. Their success demonstrated that wealth could be won not only through armies, but through business. Yet they were not alone. The English East India Company had also grown steadily stronger. Originally founded as a commercial enterprise, the company had evolved into something much larger. It maintained its own fleets, employed thousands of sailors, negotiated treaties with foreign rulers, and even commanded private armies. In many ways, it operated almost like a nation of its own. Its directors understood that trade with India represented one of the greatest economic opportunities of the age. Every voyage between Europe and India crossed enormous distances. Every successful expedition depended upon secure sea routes. And every ship approaching the Persian Gulf recognized the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Gradually, English influence throughout the region expanded. Merchants established warehouses. Diplomats negotiated agreements. Naval officers gathered information about local politics, tides, and harbors. Although open warfare was not always necessary, competition remained constant. Every European power sought stronger commercial connections than its rivals. France soon entered this increasingly crowded world as well. French merchants, encouraged by their own East India Company, attempted to build profitable trade across the Indian Ocean. While France never achieved the same level of influence in the Persian Gulf as Britain, its presence reflected a broader reality. By now, nearly every European maritime power understood the value of these waters. The Persian Gulf had become part of a global commercial network linking Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, and East Asia. Goods no longer moved only between neighboring civilizations. They traveled across oceans. A shipment of silk might begin in China, pass through India, continue across the Arabian Sea, enter the Persian Gulf, and eventually reach markets thousands of kilometers away in Europe. Coffee from Arabia, tea from Asia, textiles from India, silver from Europe, pearls from the Gulf. Each cargo represented another thread woven into an increasingly interconnected world. As commerce expanded, another transformation quietly took place. Private trading companies gradually gave way to direct government involvement. Among all the European powers, Britain emerged as the strongest. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the British Empire had become the dominant naval power on Earth. Its greatest possession overseas was India. Often described as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, India generated immense wealth through agriculture, manufacturing, taxation, and trade. Protecting the sea route to India became one of Britain's highest strategic priorities. Every British official understood that secure communication with India depended upon safe navigation across the Indian Ocean and through the waters surrounding the Arabian Peninsula. Although ships traveling from Europe to India did not pass directly through the Strait of Hormuz on every voyage, the Persian Gulf remained critically important to Britain's broader regional strategy. The Gulf connected Britain to friendly rulers, commercial partners, and valuable markets throughout the Middle East. It also prevented rival empires from establishing dangerous footholds near India's western approaches. To secure these interests, the Royal Navy steadily increased its presence across the region. Powerful warships patrolled the surrounding waters. Naval officers surveyed coastlines with remarkable precision. Charts became increasingly accurate, allowing larger vessels to navigate safely through channels that had challenged sailors for centuries. The Royal Navy also confronted piracy, which threatened merchant vessels operating throughout the Gulf. For many local communities, piracy had long been part of regional maritime life. But from Britain's perspective, attacks on commercial shipping endangered international trade and imperial stability. Naval patrols there sought to suppress piracy, while encouraging agreements with coastal rulers. Gradually, Britain established a network of political relationships across the Gulf. Rather than annexing every coastal territory, British officials often preferred treaties. Local rulers retained authority over their lands, while Britain provided military protection and encouraged peaceful maritime trade. This approach proved remarkably effective. Without governing every village or every port directly, Britain expanded its influence across much of the region. The Strait of Hormuz once again found itself at the center of global strategy. Merchant vessels sailed continuously through nearby waters. Steamships gradually replaced sailing ships. Coal-powered engines reduced dependence on seasonal winds that had guided mariners for thousands of years. Travel became faster. Trade increased. The world itself seemed to grow smaller. Yet despite all these technological advances, geography remained unchanged. The same rugged mountains overlooked the coast. The same narrow passage connected the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman. The same islands continued to observe every vessel entering and leaving these historic waters. Empires had changed. Ships had changed. The purpose of the cargo had changed. But the Strait of Hormuz remained exactly where nature had placed it millions of years before. As the 19th century drew toward its close, Few could have imagined that an even greater transformation was approaching. For thousands of years, merchants had crossed these waters carrying spices, silk, pearls, horses, precious metals, and countless luxury goods. Soon, another cargo would begin flowing through the strait, a resource hidden deep beneath the deserts of the Middle East. A resource that would fuel factories, power automobiles, launch aircraft, and reshape the global economy. Its discovery would elevate the Strait of Hormuz from one of history's greatest trade routes to the single most important energy corridor on Earth. The Age of Spices had built its reputation. The Age of Oil would redefine its destiny forever. For thousands of years, the Strait of Hormuz had been famous for the treasures that passed across its waters: silk from China, spices from India, pearls from the Persian Gulf, Arabian horses, precious metals, fine textiles, and countless other goods that connected civilizations across 3 continents. Its importance had always come from trade, but during the early 20th century, everything changed. A new resource was discovered beneath the deserts of the Middle East. Unlike silk or spices, it could not be admired for its beauty. Unlike pearls, it held no place in royal jewelry. Yet this dark liquid would become more valuable than almost anything the ancient merchants of Hormuz could have imagined: oil. Its discovery transformed not only the Middle East, but the entire modern world. At first, few people realized just how significant petroleum would become. It was used in relatively small quantities for lighting and lubrication, but the rapid rise of the automobile, the airplane, and modern industry changed everything. Factories required fuel. Ships abandoned coal in favor of oil. Military fleets became faster and more efficient. Cities demanded ever-growing supplies of energy. The world entered the Age of Oil. As exploration expanded across the Middle East, enormous reserves were discovered beneath the region's deserts. In Persia, modern-day Iran, one of the first major oil discoveries was made in the early 20th century, attracting international attention and investment. Soon afterward, even larger reserves were found elsewhere. Saudi Arabia revealed fields so vast that they would eventually become among the largest ever discovered. Kuwait, despite its relatively small size, proved to possess extraordinary underground wealth. Iraq's giant oil fields stretched across broad plains that had once been home to ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. The United Arab Emirates uncovered enormous reserves beneath both desert sands and offshore waters. Qatar, already known for its maritime traditions, developed not only oil but also some of the world's largest natural gas deposits. Together with Iran, these nations surrounded the Persian Gulf with an almost unimaginable concentration of energy resources. By the middle of the 20th century, the Persian Gulf had become the heart of the global oil industry. The geography that had once guided ancient merchants now served an entirely different purpose. Instead of wooden sailing ships carrying spices and silk, enormous steel tankers began crossing the Gulf. Some stretched for hundreds of meters. Each vessel carried millions of barrels of crude oil, enough to fuel cities, industries, and transportation networks thousands of kilometers away. And every one of those ships faced the same geographical reality. Before reaching the Arabian Sea and the wider oceans beyond, they had to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There was no easier natural route. Once again, this narrow passage became the indispensable gateway between the Persian Gulf and the rest of the world. Only now, the cargo was no longer luxury goods. It was energy itself. As global demand continued to grow, traffic through the strait increased year after year. Day and night, tankers departed from ports across Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran. their destinations stretched across the globe. Some sailed east toward India, China, Japan, and South Korea, where expanding industries required enormous amounts of imported energy. Others crossed the Indian Ocean before passing through the Suez Canal, or around Africa on their way to Europe. Still others continued toward North America and other distant markets. Although the destinations differed, the beginning of their journey was remarkably similar. One after another, they entered the narrow waters of Hormuz. From above, the shipping lanes resemble carefully organized streams flowing through a natural funnel. International regulations separate vessels traveling in opposite directions, creating orderly corridors that reduce the risk of collision. Even so, the navigable channels available to the world's largest tankers are surprisingly narrow. Thousands of years after ancient sailors cautiously guided wooden ships through these waters, modern captains continue to navigate the same passage with extraordinary precision. The scale, however, is almost impossible to comprehend. Today, roughly 1/4 of all the oil transported by sea around the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz. No other maritime chokepoint carries such a large share of the global energy trade. Every day, millions of barrels of crude oil leave the Persian Gulf through this single gateway. If the flow continues uninterrupted, factories remain productive, aircraft continue to fly, cargo ships cross the oceans, and cities around the world receive the energy they need. But if that flow slows or stops, the consequences can be felt almost immediately. Oil prices often respond within hours. Financial markets grow uneasy. Governments closely monitor developments. Even countries located thousands of kilometers away understand that events inside this narrow waterway can influence the global economy. It is remarkable to think that a passage less than 50 kilometers wide carries such enormous responsibility. Its importance no longer depends solely on geography. It now rests at the center of the world's energy system. This transformation also reshaped international politics. The nations surrounding the Persian Gulf became increasingly significant on the global stage, not only because of their history or geography, but because they supplied the fuel that powered modern civilization. Relationships between governments, energy companies, and major world powers became deeply connected to the uninterrupted movement of oil through Hormuz. The quiet waterway that had once welcomed ancient merchants now carried one of humanity's most valuable resources. Yet despite the arrival of modern technology, giant tankers, and sophisticated navigation systems, one fundamental truth remained unchanged. Nature had created only one narrow entrance to the Persian Gulf. Just as merchants carrying silk had depended upon Hormuz thousands of years earlier, today's energy industry depends upon the very same passage. History, in many ways, had come full circle. The cargo had changed. The ships had changed. The value of what they carried had grown beyond anything previous generations could have imagined. But the Strait of Hormuz remained exactly where it had always been, a quiet corridor between rugged coastlines, patiently watching the world sail through. It had once connected ancient civilizations. Now it connected the engines of the modern world. And because so much of the world's energy depended upon this single maritime gateway, the Strait of Hormuz was no longer simply an important trade route. It had become the most critical energy choke point on Earth. In the next chapter, we will discover how this peaceful waterway gradually became one of the world's most closely watched flashpoints, where diplomacy, military power, and global energy security continue to meet upon the same narrow sea that has shaped history for thousands of years. By the middle of the 20th century, the world had entered a new and uncertain era. The Second World War had come to an end, but lasting peace did not follow. Instead, A different kind of conflict emerged, one fought less with direct battles, and more through diplomacy, military alliances, intelligence operations, and global influence. History would remember this period as the Cold War. Although the United States and the Soviet Union rarely fought each other directly, their rivalry reached nearly every corner of the globe. Europe became divided. Asia became a battlefield of competing ideologies. Africa and Latin America witnessed struggles for influence. And gradually, the Middle East became one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. The reason was no longer difficult to understand: oil. As the world's industries expanded and automobiles filled the roads, the demand for petroleum continued to grow at an astonishing pace. The oil fields surrounding the Persian Gulf supplied an ever-increasing share of that demand, making the region vital to the economies of both developed and developing nations. And standing between those oil fields and the open ocean was the Strait of Hormuz. For the United States, protecting this narrow waterway became far more than a regional concern. It became a global priority. American leaders understood that any disruption to the flow of oil could affect not only the United States, but also its allies in Europe and Asia. Economic prosperity, industrial production, and military readiness all depended upon reliable access to energy. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer simply a trade route. It had become a strategic lifeline. Across the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union viewed the region through a different lens. Although the Soviet Union possessed enormous natural resources of its own, it recognized the geopolitical importance of the Persian Gulf. Expanding influence in the Middle East could strengthen Soviet diplomacy, challenge Western interests, and increase its presence near one of the world's most valuable energy corridors. Without firing a single shot at one another, the two superpowers began competing for influence throughout the region. Governments received military assistance. Diplomatic agreements multiplied. Intelligence agencies quietly expanded their operations. Every political shift in the Gulf attracted attention in both Washington and Moscow. The Strait of Hormuz had become part of a much larger global chessboard. Unlike earlier centuries, however, control was no longer measured simply by castles or coastal fortresses. It was measured by naval power. Throughout the Cold War, the United States steadily expanded its military presence across the surrounding waters. Aircraft carriers, guided missile destroyers, submarines, supply ships. Together, they formed one of the most sophisticated naval forces ever assembled. Their mission was straightforward: to ensure that international shipping could continue moving safely through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The United States Navy conducted regular patrols, monitored maritime traffic, and strengthened cooperation with friendly nations throughout the region. Its presence served several purposes at once. It reassured allies, it discouraged potential military threats, and it demonstrated America's commitment to protecting one of the world's most important maritime corridors. At the same time, the United States developed closer relationships with several Gulf nations. Military cooperation increased. Joint exercises became more frequent. Ports and airfields across the region gradually took on greater strategic importance. While the United States did not seek to govern these countries, it recognized that maintaining strong partnerships would help preserve regional stability and protect international commerce. Over time, a network of military facilities and logistical support bases emerged across the Gulf region. These installations allowed American forces to respond more quickly during times of crisis, provide humanitarian assistance when necessary, and maintain a continuous naval presence near the Strait of Hormuz. Although many of these facilities were relatively modest at first, together they formed an important framework for regional security. Meanwhile, merchant shipping continued almost without pause. Every day, oil tankers departed from ports in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Iran, escorted by modern navigation systems and protected by international maritime law. They crossed the same waters that ancient sailors had once navigated by observing the stars. The contrast was remarkable. Above the calm sea, giant steel vessels carried millions of barrels of oil. Below the surface, the same currents that had guided wooden ships thousands of years earlier continued their quiet journey toward the Arabian Sea. History and modern technology existed side by side. As tensions between East and West occasionally intensified, the possibility of disruption in the Persian Gulf became a constant concern. Military planners studied every possible scenario. Economists calculated how interruptions to oil supplies might affect global markets. Diplomats worked to prevent regional disputes from escalating into wider conflicts. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer viewed only through the eyes of sailors and merchants. It had become an essential component of international security. A narrow waterway less than 50 kilometers wide now influenced decisions made in the world's most powerful capitals. Its strategic value extended far beyond Middle East. Factories in Europe depended upon the energy flowing through it. Growing economies across Asia relied upon the uninterrupted arrival of oil. The industrial strength of countless nations was linked, directly or indirectly, to the safe passage of ships through Hormuz. During the Cold War, this realization fundamentally changed the role of the strait. For thousands of years, it had connected civilizations through trade. Now it also connected military strategy, diplomacy, and global energy security. It was no longer simply a commercial gateway. It had become one of the world's most carefully watched strategic corridors. Yet despite the growing presence of warships, surveillance aircraft, and advanced technology, the strait itself remained surprisingly peaceful for much of this period. Fishing boats still ventured into familiar waters. Merchant captains continued their daily routines. The tides rose and fell just as they always had. To an observer standing on the rocky coastline at sunset, there was little indication that this quiet passage lay at the center of one of history's greatest geopolitical rivalries. But appearances could be deceiving. Beneath the calm surface, the balance of global power increasingly depended upon stability in these waters. The Cold War eventually drew to a close as the Soviet Union dissolved in the early 1990s. The rivalry between the two superpowers had ended. Yet the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz did not fade with it. If anything, it became even greater. The world was becoming more interconnected than ever before, and global demand for energy continued to rise. In the years ahead, new regional tensions, new military confrontations, and new diplomatic challenges would once again place the Strait of Hormuz at the center of international attention. Its long history was far from over. In many ways, the most closely watched chapter had only just begun. For much of the 20th century, the Strait of Hormuz had become an essential artery of the global economy. Oil tankers crossed its waters day and night, carrying energy from the Persian Gulf to every corner of the world. While tensions occasionally surfaced, the flow of commerce continued, and many believed the region had entered a period of relative stability. That sense of stability, however, would not last. In the late 1970s, Iran stood at the center of dramatic political change. For decades, the country had been ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch who pursued rapid modernization and maintained close ties with the United States and many Western nations. Under his rule, Iran invested heavily in industry, infrastructure, education, and military power. To many outside observers, the country appeared to be one of the strongest American allies in the Middle East. Yet beneath the surface, dissatisfaction had been growing. Many Iranians believed that modernization had come too quickly, leaving traditional values behind. Others criticized political repression, economic inequality, and the concentration of power within the monarchy. Demonstrations gradually spread across the country, bringing together students, workers, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens from many different backgrounds. By the beginning of 1979, the protests had become impossible to contain. The Shah left Iran. His departure marked the end of a monarchy that had ruled the country for generations. Soon afterward, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to overwhelming public support. Within months, Iran officially declared itself an Islamic republic, replacing the monarchy with a new political system based upon Islamic governance. It was one of the most significant political transformations of the modern era. The revolution reshaped Iran from within, but it also transformed its relationship with the rest of the world. Perhaps nowhere was this change more dramatic than in its ties with the United States. For many years, Washington and Tehran had worked closely together. That partnership came to an abrupt end. Later in 1979, a group of Iranian students entered the United States Embassy in Tehran and took dozens of American diplomats hostage. The crisis lasted for more than 1 year, dominating international headlines and deeply damaging relations between the two countries. Trust disappeared. Diplomatic relations were severed. Economic sanctions followed. The partnership that had once defined regional politics was replaced by decades of suspicion and confrontation. Although the two nations would occasionally communicate through indirect channels, their relationship would never fully recover. This new political reality gave the Strait of Hormuz an entirely different significance. For centuries, the waterway had been valuable because of trade. During the Cold War, it had become strategically important because of global rivalry. Now it also became a powerful instrument of geopolitics. Iran's coastline stretches along the northern side of the Strait of Hormuz, placing the country beside one of the world's most vital maritime corridors. While international shipping continued under established maritime law, Iran's geographic position meant that its actions and policies could have an immediate impact on one of the busiest energy routes on Earth. Political leaders around the world understood this reality. Whenever tensions between Iran and the West increased, attention quickly returned to the Strait of Hormuz. Even without military conflict, uncertainty alone could influence global energy markets. Investors watched carefully. Shipping companies reviewed their routes. Governments monitored every development with growing concern. The strait had become more than a passage for ships. It had become a symbol of strategic influence. Its importance extended far beyond the coastlines of the Persian Gulf. Events unfolding in Tehran could affect fuel prices in Europe, manufacturing in Asia, and financial markets across the globe. A narrow waterway less than 50 kilometers wide had become deeply connected to the daily lives of billions of people who would never see its shores. Yet amid these profound political changes, life on the water continued. Oil tankers still departed from ports across Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Iran. Fishing boats continued their routines. Merchant vessels crossed the same sea lanes that had served traders for thousands of years. The tides rose and fell just as they always had. History moved forward, but geography remained unchanged. The revolution of 1979 had altered governments, alliances, and the balance of power throughout the Middle East. It also changed how the world viewed the Strait of Hormuz. No longer was it simply a commercial gateway or a strategic military corridor. It had become a diplomatic pressure point, a place where politics, energy, and geography intersected in ways few other locations on Earth could match. From this moment onward, every major international crisis involving Iran would inevitably raise the same question: what might happen in the Strait of Hormuz? It was a question that governments, economists, and ordinary citizens would continue asking for decades to come. And as we will discover in the next chapter, the answer would shape some of the most tense and closely watched moments in the modern history of the Persian Gulf. As the 1980s began, the Strait of Hormuz had already become the most important energy corridor on Earth. Every day, enormous oil tankers sailed quietly through its narrow waters, carrying millions of barrels of crude oil toward Europe, Asia, and North America. Although political tensions continued to simmer across the Middle East, international shipping still flowed with remarkable consistency. Then, in 1980, everything changed. War broke out between two neighboring powers, Iran and Iraq. What many expected to be a brief border conflict soon became one of the longest and most destructive wars of the modern Middle East. The Iran-Iraq War would continue for almost 8 years, consuming vast resources and costing hundreds of thousands of lives. At first, most of the fighting took place along the land border separating the two countries. But as the conflict dragged on, both sides searched for new ways to weaken one another. Eventually, the war spread beyond the battlefield. It reached the sea. Both governments understood a simple reality: oil financed the war. The sale of petroleum purchased weapons, supplied armies, and sustained national economies. Interrupting those exports could place enormous pressure upon an opponent without requiring the capture of major cities. Slowly, commercial shipping became part of the conflict. Oil terminals were attacked. Merchant vessels came under fire. Tankers carrying crude oil found themselves sailing through increasingly dangerous waters. This new phase of the conflict became known as the tanker war. Unlike traditional naval warfare, the objective was not necessarily to sink enemy warships. Instead, both sides sought to damage the economic lifelines that kept the war alive. Ships connected to either country or to nations believed to support them became potential targets. Missiles struck commercial vessels. Naval mines drifted silently beneath the waves. Aircraft attacked tankers from above. Even neutral ships sometimes found themselves caught in the growing danger. For captains crossing the Persian Gulf, every voyage carried uncertainty. The Strait of Hormuz, once known primarily as a commercial gateway, gradually became one of the most dangerous waterways in the world. Yet despite the risks, shipping could not simply stop. The global economy depended upon these sea lanes. Oil still needed to reach international markets. Ports still required supplies. Millions of people, many living thousands of kilometers away, unknowingly depended upon the safe passage of ships through these troubled waters. As attacks increased, insurance costs for commercial vessels rose dramatically. Some shipping companies hesitated before accepting contracts. Crews understood the risks before boarding their ships. A routine voyage had become a journey through an active conflict zone. The international community watched with growing concern. Among the nations paying closest attention was the United States. American leaders feared that continued attacks on shipping could threaten global energy supplies and destabilize the broader region. Protecting freedom of navigation had become an essential strategic objective. In response, the United States launched one of the largest naval escort operations since the Second World War. The mission became known as Operation Earnest Will. Beginning in the late 1980s, American warships escorted oil tankers through the Persian Gulf, helping commercial vessels navigate the most dangerous stretches of water. Some Kuwaiti tankers were even temporarily reflagged under the American flag, allowing them to receive direct protection from the United States Navy. The operation demonstrated how deeply international security had become connected to the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow passage of water less than 50 kilometers wide now demanded the attention of one of the world's most powerful naval forces. The escorts reduced some risks, but they could not eliminate every danger. The sea itself had become a battlefield. One of the most dramatic moments came in 1988. The American guided missile frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts was conducting operations in the Persian Gulf when it struck a naval mine. The explosion was devastating. The blast tore a massive hole in the ship's hull, severely damaging its engine room and threatening to sink the vessel. For the sailors aboard, the situation was desperate. Water rushed into the damaged compartments. Fire broke out inside the ship. Crew members fought for hours to control flooding and keep the vessel afloat. Through extraordinary determination and teamwork, they succeeded. Against overwhelming odds, the ship survived. The incident shocked military planners. It demonstrated that even one hidden mine could threaten one of the world's most advanced warships. The response came only days later. The United States launched Operation Praying Mantis, the largest American naval combat operation since the end of the Second World War. Its objective was to reduce threats to international shipping and demonstrate that attacks against protected vessels would carry serious consequences. American naval forces struck several Iranian military targets at sea, including offshore platforms used for military purposes and multiple naval vessels. The engagement unfolded rapidly. Modern warships, carrier-based aircraft, and advanced weapons transformed the Persian Gulf into the scene of one of the largest naval confrontations of the Cold War period. Although the operation lasted only a short time, its significance was immense. It demonstrated how quickly events in the Strait of Hormuz could escalate from isolated attacks into major international military action. Tanker war eventually began to subside as the Iran-Iraq War approached its conclusion. A ceasefire finally brought the long conflict to an end. Merchant shipping gradually returned to more normal patterns, and the immediate danger decreased. Yet the lessons of the 1980s remained unforgettable. The world had witnessed how vulnerable the global energy system truly was. A regional conflict between neighboring countries had affected insurance markets, international trade, naval deployments, and oil prices across the globe. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer viewed merely as an important shipping route. It had become a symbol of global economic vulnerability. Governments realized that protecting this narrow passage required international cooperation, advanced naval capabilities, and constant vigilance. Even in times of relative peace, military planners would continue studying these waters with extraordinary attention. Today, ships crossing the Strait of Hormuz still pass through many of the same channels navigated during the tanker war. The surrounding mountains remain unchanged. The tides continue their ancient rhythm. From a distance, the sea often appears calm and peaceful. Yet beneath those tranquil waters lies the memory of a decade when oil tankers sailed under the protection of warships, when hidden mines threatened giant vessels, and when one of the world's smallest maritime passages briefly became one of its most dangerous. The tanker war reminded the world of a timeless truth. The Strait of Hormuz has never been important because of its size. It is important because so much of the world depends upon what passes through it. And as history would soon reveal, the challenges facing this remarkable waterway were far from over. As the 21st century began, the Strait of Hormuz entered another new chapter. The great empires of the past had disappeared. The Cold War had ended. The tanker war had become history. Yet the narrow waterway remained just as important as ever. If anything, its significance had only grown. Global energy demand continued to rise, particularly across Asia, where rapidly expanding economies required vast quantities of imported oil. Every day, enormous tankers departed from ports throughout the Persian Gulf, carrying energy that powered factories, transportation networks, and cities across the world. The rhythm of commerce continued. But beneath that familiar routine, new challenges were beginning to emerge. Unlike earlier centuries, the greatest threats no longer came only from rival empires seeking to conquer territory. The modern world faced dangers that were often less predictable. Following the terrorist attacks of the early 2000s, maritime security became a major international concern. Governments around the world began examining how vulnerable critical shipping routes might be to acts of terrorism. Although the Strait of Hormuz was never completely closed, its importance meant that even the possibility of an attack attracted global attention. Naval patrols increased. Surveillance systems became more sophisticated. International cooperation expanded as countries worked together to monitor one of the world's busiest waterways. At the same time, piracy continued to concern maritime authorities throughout parts of the wider region. While the most serious pirate activity occurred farther south, particularly near the Horn of Africa, commercial vessels traveling to and from the Persian Gulf remained alert throughout their journeys. Shipping companies introduced new security procedures. Crews received specialized training. Warships from multiple nations conducted patrols designed to discourage attacks and protect international commerce. The sea had entered a new technological age. Satellites observed shipping lanes from space. Radar systems tracked vessels across enormous distances. Aircraft monitored the coastline, and gradually, another technology began changing military operations: the unmanned aerial vehicle, better known simply as the drone. Unlike traditional aircraft, drones could remain in the air for extended periods, gathering information without placing pilots at risk. They provided governments with an unprecedented ability to observe maritime traffic, monitor coastlines, and respond more quickly to developing situations. Over time, drones became a familiar presence above the waters surrounding the Strait of Hormuz. They represented a quiet revolution in surveillance. The sea itself remained ancient. The methods used to watch it had become thoroughly modern. Warships also evolved. Today's naval vessels bear little resemblance to the wooden fleets that once competed for control of Hormuz centuries ago. Modern destroyers, frigates, submarines, and patrol ships carry advanced radar, guided missiles, sophisticated communications systems, and highly trained crews. Many nations now maintain a naval presence in or near the Persian Gulf. Some protect their own commercial shipping. Others participate in multinational security missions designed to ensure freedom of navigation through international waters. Despite these efforts, political tensions have continued to shape the region. Among the most significant has been the long and complicated relationship between the United States and Iran. Decades after the Iranian Revolution, disagreements over regional security, nuclear development, and economic sanctions continued to influence diplomatic relations. Periods of negotiation have sometimes been followed by renewed tension. each development has been watched closely around the world. Because whenever relations between Washington and Tehran become strained, attention almost immediately returns to the Strait of Hormuz. In recent years, several oil tankers operating in or near the Gulf have been detained during periods of heightened political tension. Different governments have offered differing explanations for these incidents, reflecting the complexity of international law and regional politics. Regardless of the specific circumstances, each detention quickly became international news. Insurance companies reassessed risks, shipping firms adjusted operational plans, governments issued statements calling for restraint. Once again, the world was reminded how events within a relatively small waterway could influence global markets almost overnight. Economic sanctions have added another layer to this complex story. Over the years, various countries have imposed sanctions targeting sectors of Iran's economy, particularly its energy industry. These measures have affected oil exports, financial transactions, and international trade, creating additional challenges for regional commerce. At the same time, sanctions have often been accompanied by intense diplomatic negotiations, illustrating how economics and geopolitics have become deeply interconnected. The Strait of Hormuz stands at the center of these developments, not because it creates political disputes, but because geography ensures that many of them eventually pass through its waters. Despite the headlines, however, daily life in the strait often appears remarkably ordinary. Every sunrise reveals another procession of merchant ships, carefully following established shipping lanes. Tankers move slowly toward the open sea. Container vessels continue their long voyages between continents. Fishing boats work familiar waters much as they have for generations. From the shoreline, the scene can seem almost timeless. The sea remains calm. The mountains cast long shadows across the coast. The currents continue their quiet journey toward the Gulf of Oman. Yet beneath this peaceful appearance lies one of the world's most carefully monitored maritime corridors. Naval officers observe radar screens. Satellite operators track commercial traffic. Pilots guide surveillance aircraft overhead. Diplomats follow regional developments with constant attention. Energy analysts calculate shipping volumes. Financial markets react to even the smallest signs of uncertainty. Few places on Earth connect so many different aspects of modern life. Trade, energy, security, diplomacy, economics, all converge within this remarkably narrow passage. The Strait of Hormuz has witnessed the rise of ancient civilizations, the ambitions of maritime empires, the expansion of global commerce, the discovery of oil, the rivalry of superpowers, and the emergence of new technologies that previous generations could scarcely imagine. Its story continues to evolve. The ships are larger. The surveillance is more advanced. The political landscape grows ever more complex. But one truth has remained unchanged for thousands of years. The world still depends upon this quiet gateway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. As we reach the end of our journey through the history of the Strait of Hormuz, we begin to understand that its greatest power has never come from the land surrounding it. Its influence has always come from movement. From the endless procession of ships, from the flow of trade, from the exchange of ideas, and in the modern world from the energy that continues to connect distant nations across the oceans. The Strait of Hormuz remains a place where geography quietly shapes history, one passing ship at a time. As our journey through history slowly approaches its final chapter, let us pause for a moment and consider a question that has occupied the minds of economists, military planners, diplomats, and world leaders for decades. What would happen if the Strait of Hormuz were suddenly closed? It is a question that appears simple, yet the answer reaches far beyond the shores of the Persian Gulf. Throughout this documentary, we have seen how this narrow passage evolved from an ancient trade route into the world's most important energy corridor. For thousands of years, merchants depended upon its waters to transport silk, spices, pearls, and precious goods. In the modern age, those cargoes have been replaced by something even more essential: energy. Every day, an extraordinary number of oil tankers and liquefied natural gas carriers pass through the Strait of Hormuz. They leave the ports of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Iran before continuing toward customers across Asia, Europe, and beyond. As long as those ships continue sailing, the global economy functions much as expected. But imagine, just for a moment, that the passage became completely unavailable, whether caused by conflict, a prolonged military crisis, or another unforeseen event. Ships could no longer move freely through the strait. The consequences would begin almost immediately. The first reaction would almost certainly appear in the energy markets. Oil prices respond not only to physical shortages, but also to uncertainty. Even the possibility of disruption often causes traders to anticipate reduced supplies. If the Strait of Hormuz were closed for an extended period, millions of barrels of oil each day would struggle to reach international markets. Alternative export routes do exist. Several countries have built pipelines that bypass part of the strait, allowing some oil to reach ports outside the Persian Gulf. However, these pipelines cannot replace the enormous volume normally transported by sea. The available capacity simply would not be enough. As supplies tightened, oil prices would likely rise sharply. History has repeatedly shown that energy markets react quickly whenever uncertainty surrounds the Strait of Hormuz. The effects would not stop with crude oil. The Persian Gulf is also one of the world's most important sources of liquefied natural gas. Qatar, in particular, exports vast quantities of natural gas to customers around the globe. Much of that trade also depends upon passage through Hormuz. If shipments were interrupted, natural gas prices could increase significantly, especially in countries that rely heavily upon imported energy for electricity generation, heating, and industrial production. For households, the consequences might appear gradually. Electricity costs could rise. Heating expenses might increase. Fuel for transportation could become noticeably more expensive. For businesses, however, the impact would extend much further. Modern supply chains depend upon affordable and reliable transportation. Cargo ships, trucks, aircraft, and manufacturing facilities all require energy. Higher fuel costs increase the price of moving goods across continents. Factories pay more to produce products. Shipping companies pay more to operate their fleets. Airlines spend more on aviation fuel. Eventually, many of those additional costs reach consumers. Products that once seemed ordinary begin to cost more. Food, clothing, electronics, building materials, household goods. Almost every sector of the economy feels some degree of pressure. This process contributes to inflation. When businesses face rising transportation and production costs, prices often increase throughout the economy. Families may discover that groceries become more expensive. Companies may postpone investments. Central banks may face difficult decisions as they attempt to balance economic growth with rising inflation. In today's interconnected world, a disruption in one narrow waterway can influence daily life thousands of kilometers away. The global economy has become remarkably efficient, yet efficiency often depends upon stability. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the key foundations of that stability. Not every country would experience the consequences equally. Some nations depend far more heavily upon energy imported through the Persian Gulf than others. Across Asia, countries such as Japan, South Korea, India, and China import substantial quantities of oil and natural gas from Gulf producers. Their industries, transportation systems, and electricity networks rely upon continuous deliveries arriving by sea. European countries would also feel the effects, particularly those purchasing energy from Gulf exporters to diversify their supplies. Even nations with significant domestic energy production would not remain untouched. Energy markets are global. A reduction in supply affecting one region often influences prices everywhere. Because oil is traded internationally, rising prices in one part of the world quickly spread across others. Financial markets would likely respond as well. Investors generally dislike uncertainty. Major disruptions to one of the world's most important shipping routes could increase market volatility, affect exchange rates, and reduce business confidence. Governments would closely monitor developments while coordinating with allies, energy producers, and international organizations. Diplomatic efforts would almost certainly intensify. Naval forces might increase their presence to ensure maritime security. Alternative transportation routes would be examined. Emergency oil reserves, maintained by many countries for precisely these kinds of situations, could help reduce immediate shortages. Yet such measures are designed to provide time, rather than permanent solutions. Ultimately, no reserve can permanently replace the uninterrupted movement of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. Fortunately, despite decades of political tension, military confrontations, and regional crises, the strait has never experienced a prolonged closure. Commercial shipping has continued, demonstrating both the resilience of international trade and the shared interest that many nations have in preserving freedom of navigation. Perhaps this is the most remarkable lesson of all. Throughout history, empires competed for Hormuz, kingdoms defended it, navies patrolled it, diplomats negotiated over it. Yet the waterway has always served a purpose greater than any single nation. It connects producers with consumers. It links continents through commerce. It reminds us that geography can quietly shape the destiny of civilizations for thousands of years. The Strait of Hormuz is only a narrow passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, but its influence reaches every continent. From the fuel inside an automobile, to the electricity illuminating a distant city, to the products arriving on store shelves. The effects of this small stretch of water travel farther than the eye can see, and perhaps that is the greatest mystery of Hormuz. Not that it is narrow, but that something so small continues to carry such extraordinary importance in the story of our interconnected world. For thousands of years, the Strait of Hormuz has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the passage of countless merchant fleets, and the steady rhythm of global commerce. Most days, its waters appear remarkably peaceful. Oil tankers move slowly along carefully marked shipping lanes. Fishing boats drift quietly near the coastline. The rugged mountains cast long shadows over the sea as the sun begins to set. To an observer standing on the shore, it can seem impossible that this narrow stretch of water has repeatedly become one of the most closely watched places on Earth. Yet history has shown that calm waters can hide extraordinary tension. Unlike many famous battlefields, the Strait of Hormuz has rarely been defined by one single decisive event. Instead, its story is marked by moments of crisis. Each crisis has been different. Each has involved different governments, different political circumstances, and different military technologies. But they all shared one common consequence. Whenever tension rises in the Strait of Hormuz, the entire world pays attention, not because of the water itself, but because so much of the world's energy still flows through this narrow gateway. The first major modern crisis came during 1988, near the closing stages of the long Iran-Iraq War. As we explored in the previous chapter, the tanker war had transformed commercial shipping into part of the wider conflict. Oil tankers were attacked. Naval mines threatened international shipping. Warships from multiple nations entered the Gulf to protect maritime traffic. One of the defining moments occurred when the American frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine. Although the ship survived, the incident demonstrated how even a single hidden explosive could threaten one of the world's most important shipping routes. The American response, Operation Praying Mantis, became the largest naval engagement involving the United States since the Second World War. For several tense hours, the Persian Gulf reminded the world that a regional conflict could rapidly draw in major international powers. When the fighting subsided, commercial traffic resumed, but confidence had been shaken. Insurance premiums increased. Shipping companies reviewed their security procedures. Governments realized that the uninterrupted movement of energy could never be taken for granted. 2 decades later, another crisis unfolded under very different circumstances. In 2008, the world was experiencing record demand for energy. Rapid economic growth, particularly across Asia, had increased global consumption to levels never before seen. At the same time, international concern over Iran's nuclear program intensified. Political statements from multiple governments became increasingly confrontational. Military exercises in the Gulf attracted worldwide attention. Although the Strait of Hormuz remained open, discussions about the possibility of disruption became more frequent. Financial markets reacted immediately. Even without any interruption to shipping, uncertainty alone influenced oil prices. Investors understood an important reality. Markets often respond not only to events that happen, but also to events that might happen. This pattern became even more visible in 2012. Economic sanctions targeting Iran expanded significantly, affecting important sectors of its economy, including energy exports. At various moments during this period, public statements from Iranian officials suggested that the Strait of Hormuz could become part of the broader political dispute if pressure continued to increase. International shipping continued, but the possibility of disruption received extensive global attention. Naval forces from several countries maintained a visible presence throughout the region. Commercial operators carefully monitored every new development. Energy traders watched diplomatic announcements almost as closely as they watched production figures. Again, the strait itself remained open. Yet its strategic importance had become impossible to ignore. It had become clear that uncertainty alone could influence markets across continents. Then came 2019. A series of incidents involving commercial vessels near the Gulf attracted worldwide attention. Several oil tankers suffered damage in separate events, while other vessels were detained during periods of heightened regional tension. Different governments offered differing explanations regarding responsibility, reflecting the complexity of the political environment. What remained beyond dispute was the international reaction. Shipping companies reassessed operational risks. Marine insurance costs increased for voyages through the region. Governments strengthened naval patrols and encouraged greater cooperation to protect commercial navigation. For captains sailing through Hormuz, routine voyages suddenly required even greater vigilance. The events served as another reminder that confidence is one of the most valuable commodities in global trade. When confidence weakens, costs often rise long before physical shortages appear. The most recent period of heightened concern came during 2025. Continuing regional instability, combined with renewed diplomatic tensions and security incidents in the wider Middle East, once again placed the Strait of Hormuz at the center of international attention. Although commercial shipping continued, governments, shipping companies, and energy markets closely monitored developments day by day. Once again, the lesson remained unchanged. A waterway less than 50 kilometers wide continued to influence decisions made in boardrooms, naval headquarters, and government capitals across the world. Each crisis eventually eased, ships continued sailing, trade continued flowing, yet every episode left behind the same quiet reminder. The strength of the global economy depends not only upon production, but also upon safe passage. And few passages have carried a greater responsibility than the Strait of Hormuz. By the time the world reached the middle of the 21st century, one remarkable pattern had become impossible to ignore. None of these crises had permanently closed the Strait of Hormuz. Yet every single one of them had reached far beyond the Middle East. That is the unusual nature of this narrow waterway. Its greatest influence does not begin when ships stop moving. It begins when people fear they might. Modern financial markets move with extraordinary speed. Thousands of traders, economists, shipping companies, and governments monitor developments around the strait every hour of every day. News of a military exercise, a diplomatic disagreement, or an incident involving a single commercial vessel can spread across the world within minutes. Long before an oil tanker changes course, global markets have already begun to react. Oil prices may rise. Shipping companies may delay departures while assessing the latest security reports. Insurance providers may increase premiums for vessels entering the Persian Gulf. Investors may move their money toward safer assets, uncertain about what the next few days might bring. In many ways, uncertainty has become almost as powerful as reality itself. For the captains guiding enormous tankers through Hormuz, every voyage requires careful preparation. Routes are planned in advance. Weather forecasts are examined. Navigation systems are checked repeatedly. Crews remain in constant communication with maritime authorities, while naval patrols continue to observe the surrounding waters. Despite the political headlines, most journeys are completed safely. Millions of barrels of oil continue to leave the Gulf every day. Container ships continue carrying manufactured goods between continents. Liquefied natural gas carriers depart on long voyages toward customers across Asia and Europe. Commerce continues because countless people work together to keep these sea lanes open. Behind every successful voyage lies an invisible network of cooperation. Harbor pilots, coast guards, naval officers, meteorologists, port authorities, engineers, international organizations. Their work rarely appears in newspaper headlines, yet it quietly supports one of the busiest maritime corridors on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz has become a place where diplomacy and navigation exist side by side. When tensions increase, governments often choose communication before confrontation. Telephone calls are made between foreign ministers. International organizations encourage restraint. Regional partners exchange information. Naval commanders coordinate movements to reduce the possibility of misunderstanding. History has shown that even small mistakes in these narrow waters could have consequences reaching far beyond the Gulf itself. Another important lesson has emerged over the past several decades. Countries have worked to reduce their dependence upon a single transportation route. Some producers have expanded pipeline networks, leading to ports outside the Persian Gulf. Others have invested in strategic petroleum reserves, storing emergency supplies that can be released if international markets experience temporary disruptions. Many importing nations have also diversified their energy sources, purchasing oil and natural gas from multiple regions, rather than relying upon only one supplier. Renewable energy has gradually become part of this broader strategy as well. Solar power, wind energy, hydroelectric projects, nuclear power. Each new source contributes, in its own way, to reducing pressure on traditional fuel supplies. Yet despite these efforts, the Strait of Hormuz remains irreplaceable. No alternative route currently matches its enormous capacity. Every day, countless ships continue to pass through the same narrow corridor that ancient sailors first navigated thousands of years ago. Technology has changed beyond recognition. The geography has not. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Hormuz. Throughout history, civilizations have changed their languages, religions, governments, and technologies. Empires have appeared and disappeared. Wooden sailing ships have given way to giant steel tankers guided by satellites. Messages that once required months now travel around the world in seconds. But one small passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman continues to shape events with remarkable consistency. Its influence has never depended upon the size of its coastline, nor upon the population living beside it. Its power comes from connection. It connects energy producers with consumers. It connects continents through commerce. It connects local events with global consequences. A decision made along these shores can influence fuel prices in Tokyo, factory production in Shanghai, airline operating costs in London, and inflation in cities thousands of kilometers away. Few places demonstrate the interconnected nature of the modern world more clearly than the Strait of Hormuz. Looking back across the centuries, the pattern becomes almost timeless. The Sumerians recognized its value. The Kingdom of Hormuz built its prosperity upon it. Portuguese explorers fought to control it. Persian rulers reclaimed it. European empires competed for influence around it. The discovery of oil transformed it. The Cold War elevated its strategic importance. Modern diplomacy continues to revolve around it. The names of the rulers have changed. The flags flying above the ships have changed. Even the cargo has changed. Yet the strait itself remains quietly constant. As evening falls once more over these historic waters, another procession of ships moves steadily toward the horizon. Some carry crude oil. Others transport natural gas. Container ships follow behind them, linking factories, ports, and markets across the globe. From the shoreline, the scene appears calm. The sea reflects the fading light. The mountains stand silent, just as they have for millions of years. It is difficult to imagine that this peaceful passage continues to influence the daily lives of billions of people. And perhaps that is the enduring mystery of the Strait of Hormuz. Its greatest strength has never been found in armies, fortresses, or warships. It has always been found in movement, in the quiet, continuous flow of ships, in the exchange of goods, in the invisible threads of trade that bind distant nations together. For thousands of years, the world has changed around the Strait of Hormuz. The strait, in return, has quietly continued doing what it has always done, connecting the world one voyage at a time. Throughout history, people have often asked a simple question. If the Strait of Hormuz is so important, why not simply use another route? At first the answer seems straightforward. Build more pipelines, transport oil by land, send ships from different ports. Surely, in an age of remarkable engineering, humanity has found another way. Yet the reality is far more complicated. Despite decades of technological progress and billions of dollars invested in energy infrastructure, the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most difficult maritime passages to replace. The reason begins with geography. Nearly every major oil and natural gas producer along the Persian Gulf shares the same challenge. Their largest export terminals are located inside the Gulf itself. Before reaching the Arabian Sea and the wider Indian Ocean, ships must first pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Nature has provided only one direct gateway. Over the years, governments have worked hard to reduce this dependence. Among the most significant efforts has been the construction of pipelines that bypass the strait. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter for many decades, invested heavily in an east-to-west pipeline stretching across the Arabian Peninsula. Rather than sending every barrel of oil toward the Persian Gulf, part of its production can travel overland terminals on the Red Sea. From there, tankers can sail directly toward Europe or other destinations without entering the Strait of Hormuz. It is an impressive engineering achievement. Thousands of kilometers of steel-crossed deserts that once seemed impossible to traverse. Powerful pumping stations move enormous volumes of crude oil across the kingdom every single day. The pipeline provides valuable flexibility during periods of regional uncertainty, yet it has limits. Its capacity, although enormous, cannot replace all of Saudi Arabia's exports moving through the Persian Gulf. Not every oil field connects directly to the system. Not every shipment can simply change direction overnight. The pipeline offers an alternative for part of the flow, not for all of it. The United Arab Emirates has pursued a similar strategy. Recognizing the strategic importance of the strait, the country constructed a pipeline linking inland oil fields with the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. Unlike ports inside the Persian Gulf, Fujairah lies outside the Strait of Hormuz. Oil loaded there can enter the open ocean without passing through the narrow waterway. The project significantly strengthened the resilience of the UAE's energy exports. Fujairah has also grown into one of the world's most important energy storage and bunkering hubs, serving ships traveling across the Indian Ocean. Even so, the pipeline has practical limitations. Its capacity represents only a portion of the region's total production. It cannot carry exports from neighboring countries, nor can it suddenly absorb millions of additional barrels each day if the strait were unavailable. Pipelines, remarkable though they are, cannot simply replace one of the busiest maritime corridors on Earth. Capacity is the central challenge. The Strait of Hormuz handles an extraordinary volume of energy exports every day. Even if every available bypass pipeline operated at full capacity, together they would still move far less than the amount normally transported through the strait. There is another important consideration. Oil is only part of the story. Natural gas is equally significant. Qatar, one of the world's leading exporters of liquefied natural gas, depends heavily upon maritime transportation. Unlike crude oil, which can often travel through pipelines, liquefied natural gas follows a different path. After being cooled to extremely low temperatures, it is loaded onto specially designed LNG carriers. These enormous vessels transport the fuel across oceans to customers throughout Asia, Europe, and beyond. There is currently no large-scale overland alternative capable of replacing this maritime system. Every LNG carrier departing Qatar must leave the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. For this reason, the waterway is not only an oil corridor, it is also one of the world's most important natural gas gateways. The challenge extends beyond energy itself. Modern shipping is remarkably efficient, because the sea remains the least expensive method of transporting massive quantities of cargo over long distances. A single supertanker can carry millions of barrels of oil in one voyage. To move the same volume by trucks would require an almost unimaginable number of vehicles. Even rail transportation cannot match the carrying capacity of the largest ocean-going tankers. The sea remains unmatched. That is why maritime transportation continues to global energy trade. Ports, terminals, refineries, and shipping companies have all developed around this reality. Replacing such an interconnected system would require decades of construction and investments measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. Even then, geography would still impose limits. The Strait of Hormuz exists because nature created a narrow opening between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman millions of years ago. No engineering project can move an entire sea. Over the years, countries have wisely invested in diversification. Strategic petroleum reserves provide temporary supplies during emergencies. Pipeline networks reduce some dependence upon maritime transport. Renewable energy has expanded steadily, while improvements in efficiency have reduced fuel consumption in many sectors. Together, these changes have strengthened global energy security, but they have not eliminated the importance of Hormuz. Instead, they have reduced only part of the risk. The strait remains the shortest, most efficient, and most economical route for a tremendous share of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas exports. Its importance is not the result of politics alone. It is the result of geography, economics, and decades of infrastructure built around one natural passage. As the sun slowly sets over the calm waters of the strait, another long procession of ships begins its familiar journey toward the open ocean. Some carry crude oil. Others transport liquefied natural gas. Each vessel follows carefully marked shipping lanes that generations of sailors have crossed before them. From above, the movement appears almost effortless. Yet behind every voyage lies an extraordinary network of pipelines, storage facilities, ports, engineers, navigators, and international cooperation. The world has spent decades searching for alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz. It has found valuable supplements. It has found partial solutions. But it has never found a true replacement. For now, this narrow ribbon of water remains exactly what it has been for thousands of years, the indispensable gateway between the Persian Gulf and the rest of the world. As our journey through the history of the Strait of Hormuz gently approaches its final destination, one quiet question remains. Will this narrow passage continue to shape the world for generations to come, or will history slowly move beyond it? For thousands of years, the answer seemed obvious. Ancient merchants carried silk and spices through these waters. European empires fought to control them. Modern oil tankers transformed Hormuz into the world's most important energy corridor. Again and again, the strait adapted to changing civilizations while remaining essential to global trade. But the 21st century is introducing changes unlike any seen before. Around the world, countries are beginning one of the largest energy transitions in modern history. For more than 100 years, oil has powered the global economy. It has fueled automobiles, aircraft, cargo ships, factories, and countless industries. Today, however, governments are investing heavily in new technologies designed to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Among the most visible changes is the rapid growth of electric vehicles. In cities across Europe, North America, and Asia, more people are choosing cars powered by electricity rather than gasoline or diesel. Major automobile manufacturers have announced ambitious plans to expand their electric vehicle production. Charging stations continue to appear in more countries each year. As battery technology improves, electric vehicles become capable of traveling longer distances while requiring less time to recharge. If this transition continues for decades, global demand for oil used in road transportation may gradually decline. Yet the story is more complex than it first appears. Cars represent only one part of the world's energy consumption. Commercial aviation still depends heavily upon liquid fuels. Most large cargo ships continue using conventional marine fuels. Heavy industries such as steel, cement, and chemical manufacturing require enormous amounts of energy that cannot always be replaced easily. Even as electric vehicles become increasingly common, oil will likely remain important in many sectors for years to come. Another technology attracting worldwide attention is hydrogen. Many scientists and engineers believe hydrogen could play an important role in reducing carbon emissions, particularly in industries where batteries remain impractical. Several countries have already begun investing in hydrogen production, transportation, and storage. Some envision future ships powered by hydrogen-based fuels. Others hope it may eventually support aviation or heavy manufacturing. Although many technical and economic challenges remain, hydrogen represents another step toward a more diversified global energy system. Renewable energy is also expanding rapidly. Solar panels now cover vast desert landscapes. Offshore wind farms generate electricity far from the coastline. Hydroelectric dams continue supplying renewable power to millions of homes. Together, these technologies are gradually reshaping how nations think about energy security. But even as the world changes, geography remains remarkably constant. The countries surrounding the Persian Gulf continue to possess some of the largest oil and natural gas reserves ever discovered. For decades to come, these resources are expected to remain an important part of the global energy mix, particularly for developing economies where demand continues to grow. As long as these resources are exported by sea, the Strait of Hormuz will retain extraordinary importance. Another major factor shaping the future of Hormuz is the rise of China. Over the past several decades, China has become one of the world's largest economies and one of its biggest energy consumers. Its industries, transportation systems, and growing population require vast quantities of imported oil and natural gas. A significant share of those imports originates in the Persian Gulf. For this reason, stability in the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a regional concern for China. It is closely connected to the country's long-term economic development. Chinese companies have invested in ports, infrastructure, shipping, and energy projects across many parts of the world. As China's global commercial interests continue expanding, its attention toward maritime security has naturally increased as well. At the same time, the United States continues to view the Persian Gulf as a region of immense strategic importance. For decades, the United States Navy has maintained a significant presence in nearby waters, working with regional partners to support maritime security and the free movement of international commerce. Although the global balance of power continues to evolve, the mission remains broadly familiar. Protect one of the world's most important shipping routes. Ensure that commercial vessels can navigate safely. Support stability in a region where local events often produce global consequences. Iran, too, will remain an essential part of the Strait's future. Sharing the northern coastline of Hormuz, Iran occupies one of the most strategically significant geographic positions in the world. Its policies, diplomatic relationships, and regional role will continue influencing international discussions surrounding the strait. Periods of cooperation may encourage greater stability. Periods of disagreement may once again increase uncertainty. As history has repeatedly demonstrated, developments in the region rarely remain local for long. They often ripple outward, affecting energy markets, international shipping, and diplomatic relations across the globe. Yet, perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Hormuz is not the uncertainty surrounding its future. It is its remarkable ability to adapt. Over thousands of years, the strait has survived the collapse of ancient kingdoms, the arrival of European empires, the discovery of oil, the Cold War, regional conflicts, and the rapid technological transformation of the modern age. Each era predicted change. Each era brought change. And still, the strait remained central to the movement of people, goods, and energy. Will that continue throughout the coming decades? No one can answer with complete certainty. The global transition toward cleaner energy will undoubtedly reduce dependence on fossil fuels over time. New technologies will continue emerging. Transportation systems will evolve. Energy sources will become more diverse. But transitions measured across entire civilizations rarely happen quickly. They unfold over decades, sometimes even generations, until alternative energy systems can fully replace the enormous volumes of oil and natural gas moving through the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz will almost certainly remain one of the world's most strategically significant waterways. Its importance may gradually change. It may eventually diminish, but it is unlikely to disappear anytime soon. As evening settles once again over these historic waters, another line of ships quietly heads toward the open ocean. Some carry oil. Some carry liquefied natural gas. Others transport the countless goods that connect distant continents through trade. The mountains remain silent. The tides continue their ancient rhythm. And the Strait of Hormuz, just as it has for thousands of years, patiently watches the world pass by. Its story is not simply the story of a narrow channel between two seas, it is the story of geography shaping history. A reminder that sometimes the smallest places leave the greatest mark upon civilization, and as the future slowly unfolds, the Strait of Hormuz will continue to ask the same timeless question it has asked every generation before us. Not who controls these waters, but how the world will choose to navigate them. As our quiet journey comes to an end, let us return to where it all began, a narrow stretch of water, less than 50 kilometers across at its narrowest point. From above, it appears almost insignificant compared to the vast oceans that surround it. The waves rise and fall with the same gentle rhythm they have followed for millions of years. The mountains remain silent, watching over the passage as they have since long before the first civilizations appeared. And yet, few places on Earth have influenced human history so profoundly. For more than 2,000 years, the Strait of Hormuz has been far more than a geographical feature. It has been a meeting place where merchants exchanged goods, where explorers for new horizons, where empires competed for influence, and where the fortunes of distant nations quietly became connected through a single narrow gateway. From the ancient Sumerians and the Persian kings, to the wealthy Kingdom of Hormuz, from Portuguese caravels and British warships, to the massive tankers of the modern age, generation after generation has come to these waters with different ambitions. Some sought prosperity, some sought power, others simply wished to reach the other side in peace. The ships have changed, the flags have changed, the cargo has changed, but the strait itself has remained patient, silent, unmoving. Even today, as the world gradually embraces renewable energy, electric vehicles, hydrogen, and new technologies that may one day reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, the Strait of Hormuz continues to occupy a unique place in the global economy. It remains one of the world's most important maritime chokepoints. Every day, countless vessels still pass through these waters, carrying the energy and resources that support industries, cities, and communities across the globe. Every period of tension reminds us how deeply interconnected our modern world has become. A decision made on one coastline may influence fuel prices on another continent. A delay affecting a single shipping lane may ripple through factories, supply chains, and households thousands of kilometers away. The Strait of Hormuz teaches us something larger than history alone. It reminds us that geography often shapes civilization in quiet ways. Some of the most influential places on Earth are not the largest. They are simply the places where countless journeys must pass. Perhaps that is why this narrow passage has endured for so long, not because it sought importance, but because the world repeatedly found its way here. As night gently settles over the Persian Gulf, the final ships of the day continue toward the open sea. Their lights shimmer softly upon the water. The waves whisper against their hulls. Above them, the same stars that guided ancient sailors thousands of years ago still illuminate the horizon. History continues to move forward. New technologies will emerge. New alliances will form. New challenges will undoubtedly appear. Yet the Strait of Hormuz will remain what it has always been, a quiet reminder that even the smallest places can shape the destiny of the world. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the history of the Strait of Hormuz. If you enjoyed spending this evening exploring one of the world's most remarkable waterways, I hope you will return for another gentle journey into the stories of our past. Until then, wherever you are in the world, may your evening be peaceful, your thoughts be calm, and may you drift into a restful night's sleep. Good night.